Welcome to the English Talk community. If you're here, it means you're looking for ways to improve your English fluency, and we're here to help. Our goal is to make practicing English enjoyable and effective by sharing engaging stories and real-life examples. Many people struggle to find speaking partners or feel frustrated when studying alone. But the truth is, you don't need to rely on others to improve your fluency. There are powerful ways to practice on your own, and today we'll explore some of them. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video. It helps us reach more English learners who are on the same journey as you. Have you ever found yourself hesitating before speaking, afraid of making mistakes? Maybe you understand English well but struggle to express yourself fluently. This is completely normal, and many learners go through the same challenge. The good news is that you can overcome this with simple techniques that fit into your daily routine. In today's video, I'll share stories of people who faced these struggles and discovered creative ways to practice English alone. By the end, you'll have practical ideas that can help you speak more confidently. Let's get started with our first story. Anna had always been passionate about learning English, but when she moved to Canada for work, she quickly realized that understanding the language was very different from speaking it fluently. She found herself hesitating in conversations, afraid of making mistakes. Whenever she tried to join discussions at work, her mind went blank. She wanted to speak fluently, but without enough real-life practice, her confidence suffered. One day, she came across a simple yet powerful technique, talking to herself in the mirror. At first, she felt silly. How can this help me improve? She thought. But she decided to give it a try. Every morning, she stood in front of the mirror and spoke about her day. She described what she was wearing, what her plans were, and even how she felt. In the beginning, she struggled to find the right words and often hesitated, but she kept going. After just a few days, she noticed an interesting change. She started forming sentences faster, and the hesitation she once felt was fading. The more she spoke to herself, the more comfortable she became with her own voice in English. A month later, something incredible happened. She was at a networking event, and for the first time, she joined a conversation without overthinking every sentence. Words flowed naturally, and she felt relaxed. Her colleagues even complimented her on how much her English had improved. Anna's secret? Speaking to herself daily had trained her brain to think in English. She no longer feared making mistakes because she had already practiced alone. If you've ever felt nervous about speaking, try this method. Stand in front of a mirror and talk about your day, your thoughts, or even tell yourself a story. It's an easy but effective way to build confidence and fluency. If this sounds helpful, give this video a like and let us know in the comments if you've ever tried practicing in front of a mirror. In another situation, a student found an unexpected way to improve pronunciation without leaving home. Jake had always struggled with pronunciation. No matter how much he studied, some English sounds just didn't come out right. He tried repeating words and practicing tongue twisters, but nothing seemed to work. One day, while listening to his favorite songs, he had an idea. What if he practiced English through music? He started by simply singing along, but soon he realized that if he paid close attention to the lyrics and pronunciation, he could use music as a learning tool. He picked one of his favorite songs, printed out the lyrics, and listened carefully to every word. He noticed how singers connected words smoothly, how they used rhythm and intonation, and how certain sounds blended together naturally. Instead of just singing along, he decided to mimic the pronunciation exactly as he heard it. He repeated each line over and over, imitating every detail of the singer's voice. After a few weeks, he was amazed by the results. His pronunciation had improved dramatically, and for the first time, he felt confident speaking English. The best part? It didn't feel like studying at all. He was enjoying the process, and his fluency was improving effortlessly. One day, he had a conversation with a native English speaker, and they immediately noticed how natural his speech sounded. Singing had trained his ears and mouth to produce English sounds more accurately. If you struggle with pronunciation, why not try this method? Choose an English song you love, print the lyrics, and focus on mimicking every sound. Singing helps you internalize pronunciation patterns in a fun and effortless way. Have you ever used music to improve your English? Let us know in the comments. In another story, a woman found a unique way to stay consistent with her English practice, even with a busy schedule. Emily had always dreamed of speaking English fluently, but she had one big problem: her busy schedule. Between work, family, and daily responsibilities, she barely had time to sit down and practice. She had tried language apps and online courses, but she couldn't stay consistent. Every time she started practicing, life got in the way and she would stop for weeks. Then, one day, she found a simple but powerful solution: journaling in English. Guy decided to write just a few sentences every night before bed. At first, it was difficult. She had to think hard about how to express her thoughts, and she often had to look up words. But she didn't let that discourage her. She wrote about her day, her feelings, and even small things like what she ate for lunch. She didn't worry about making mistakes. She just focused on writing something every day. After a couple of weeks, she started noticing a change. Writing became easier, and she found herself remembering words more quickly. Even better, her speaking skills improved. How? Because writing helped her organize her thoughts in English, making it easier to express them in conversations. One evening, she met a friend for coffee, and they decided to speak in English as a fun challenge. To her surprise, she could form sentences much faster than before. The words that once felt stuck in her mind were now coming out naturally. It was as if writing had trained her brain to think in English more smoothly. Encouraged by her progress, she took her journaling practice to the next level. She started writing short stories, describing imaginary situations, and even writing dialogues between two characters. She realized that the more she experimented, the more confident she became. She also found a way to make the practice even more effective: reading her journal entries out loud. This helped her not only with fluency, but also with pronunciation. She would write about her day, then stand in front of the mirror and read it aloud as if she were telling a story to a friend. After a few months, Emily's improvement was undeniable. She had built a habit of thinking in English, and her fluency had increased dramatically. She no longer hesitated when speaking because she had already practiced expressing her thoughts through writing. If you struggle with consistency, try keeping a simple English journal. Start with just a few sentences a day, and don't worry about grammar or mistakes. The goal is to get comfortable expressing yourself in English. Over time, you'll notice that both your writing and speaking skills improve naturally. Have you ever tried journaling in English? If not, this might be the perfect method to fit into your daily routine. Even 5 minutes a day can make a huge difference. In another situation, a man discovered a fun and interactive way to improve his fluency without a study partner. Carlos loved watching English videos online, but he had a problem. He could understand everything, yet he couldn't speak fluently. He felt stuck. He knew the words, the grammar, and even the expressions, but when it was time to talk, he froze. He realized that his issue wasn't knowledge. It was a lack of speaking practice. Since he didn't have a language partner, he needed to find a way to practice alone. One day, while watching an English podcast, he had an idea. What if he paused the video and tried answering the questions himself? He decided to experiment with this technique. The next day, he found an interview video where the host was asking interesting questions. Instead of just listening passively, he hit pause after every question and answered it out loud as if he were in the conversation. In the beginning, it was awkward and he hesitated a lot, but he pushed through. With time, he started answering faster and more confidently. The best part? He was training himself to think in English instead of translating from his native language. His brain was getting used to forming sentences spontaneously, just like in a real conversation. To make his practice even more effective, he started recording himself. At first, he didn't like hearing his own voice, but then he realized it was a great way to identify mistakes. He could hear where he needed to improve and correct himself over time. After just a few weeks, he saw a huge improvement. He was no longer stuck when speaking. He had trained his brain to respond naturally in English, and this gave him a new level of confidence. One day, he had a conversation with a native speaker, and for the first time, he wasn't nervous. He could answer questions smoothly without long pauses or hesitation. It felt natural, like a real conversation. If you struggle with speaking, try this method. Find an English video, pause after each question, and answer it out loud. You'll be surprised at how quickly your fluency improves. And if you want to take it a step further, record yourself and listen to your progress. Does this method sound helpful? If so, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more tips. In another case, a woman found a surprising way to improve her listening skills and pronunciation at the same time. Sophie had always struggled with her pronunciation. She could read and write in English well, but when she spoke, she felt frustrated. Native speakers often asked her to repeat herself, and she felt embarrassed when she couldn't pronounce certain words correctly. She wanted to sound more natural but didn't know where to start. One day, while searching for pronunciation tips online, she discovered a technique called shadowing. It was simple but powerful. She had to listen to a native speaker and repeat what they said immediately, mimicking their intonation, rhythm, and pronunciation as closely as possible. Sophie decided to try it with her favorite podcast. She put on her headphones, played an episode, and repeated every sentence right after the speaker. At first, it was difficult. She couldn't keep up with the pace, and she felt like she was mumbling rather than speaking clearly. But she didn't give up. She slowed down the audio and practiced one sentence at a time. She repeated each sentence 3 or 4 times before moving on to the next. Slowly, her tongue started getting used to the movements, and she began to sound more fluent. After a week of practicing daily, she noticed a huge improvement. Her speech felt smoother, and she no longer hesitated when pronouncing difficult words. The best part? She started feeling more confident in real conversations. Encouraged by her progress, she expanded her practice. She used TV shows, news broadcasts, and even audiobooks. Every time she heard a phrase that sounded natural, she repeated it immediately, copying the way native speakers spoke. One day, she had a conversation with an English-speaking colleague at work. For the first time, she spoke without overthinking. Her words flowed naturally, and her pronunciation was much clearer. Her colleague even complimented her, saying, "Wow, your English sounds so natural." That moment was a turning point for Sophie. She realized that pronunciation wasn't just about learning rules. It was about training her mouth and ears to work together. The more she practiced shadowing, the more effortless speaking became. If you struggle with pronunciation, try shadowing. Pick a podcast, a YouTube video, or even a movie scene and repeat everything you hear. It might feel strange at first, but with time, you'll notice a huge improvement in how you sound. Have you ever tried shadowing before? If not, this could be a game changer for your English fluency. In another situation, a man found an unexpected way to improve his English through a childhood habit. James had been learning English for years, but he had a major problem. He barely had anyone to practice with. He lived in a small town where nobody spoke English, and he didn't feel comfortable joining online conversation groups. Every time he tried to speak, he felt nervous and self-conscious. One evening, as he was cooking dinner, he had an idea. What if he simply talked to himself in English? It sounded silly, but he decided to try it. As he chopped vegetables, he described what he was doing. "Now I'm cutting the onions. Next, I'll add some garlic. Oh, this smells amazing." It felt strange at first, but he kept going. He started narrating his daily activities, getting dressed, making coffee, even walking to the store. It was like having an internal dialogue, but out loud. The best part? He didn't have to worry about making mistakes because there was no one to judge him. After a few weeks, something surprising happened. He noticed that his sentences were coming out faster and more naturally. He wasn't translating in his head anymore. He was thinking directly in English. To make his practice more interactive, he started asking himself questions and answering them. What was the best part of my day? I think it was my morning walk because the weather was perfect. This simple exercise helped him get used to forming sentences on the spot. One day, while traveling, he met a group of English-speaking tourists. Instead of feeling nervous like he usually did, he started talking to them naturally. He was surprised at how comfortable he felt, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. That's when he realized he had been training his brain all along. By talking to himself daily, he had built the confidence to speak with others. If you don't have a language partner, don't worry. Try talking to yourself in English throughout the day. Describe what you're doing, Ask yourself questions and answer them. You'll be amazed at how much this simple habit improves your fluency. Have you ever tried this before? If not, give it a shot and see how much it helps. In another case, a woman found an unusual but effective way to train her ears and improve her listening skills. Emma had always loved music. She could spend hours listening to her favorite songs. But when it came to understanding English lyrics, she often felt lost. The words seemed to blend together, making it hard to catch what the singers were saying. She wanted to improve her listening skills but didn't know where to start. One day, she decided to take a different approach. She picked a song she loved, found the lyrics, and listened carefully while reading along. At first, it was overwhelming. The words moved so fast that she struggled to keep up. But instead of giving up, she played the song at a slower speed and sang along. She focused on the pronunciation, the way words connected, and the natural rhythm of the language. She noticed that many sounds were not pronounced the way they were written, and this was a breakthrough moment for her. After practicing with one song, Emma moved on to another. She chose different styles, pop, rock, and even jazz, to expose herself to a variety of pronunciations and accents. She started to recognize common phrases and expressions that appeared in many songs. She also realized that singing along helped her improve her fluency because it forced her to keep up with the natural speed of English speech. One day, while listening to an interview with her favorite artist, Emma was surprised to understand almost everything without needing subtitles. It was a huge confidence boost. She realized that training her ears with music had improved her overall comprehension. She could now watch English movies and TV shows and catch words she had never noticed before. In another situation, a man named Carlos faced a similar challenge, but decided to take a different approach. He loved watching sports but always relied on subtitles when listening to English commentators. Determined to change that, he made a plan. He would watch an entire game without subtitles and try to catch as many words as possible. At first, it was frustrating. The commentators spoke fast, and he could only understand a few words. But instead of feeling discouraged, Carlos took notes on the phrases he heard repeatedly. Later, he searched for their meanings and practiced repeating them out loud. Over time, he got used to the pace and began predicting what the commentators would say next. One day, while watching a live match, Carlos realized he had barely looked at the subtitles. He was fully engaged in the commentary, reacting in real time as if he were a native speaker. His listening skills had improved dramatically, all because he had turned something he loved into a learning experience. Emma and Carlos both proved that language learning doesn't have to be boring or repetitive. It can be fun, interactive, and part of your daily routine. Whether through music or sports, finding a way to enjoy the process makes all the difference. If this makes sense to you, consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a like so we know you're enjoying the content. Now, let's explore another situation where someone discovered an unconventional method to practice English. Sophia had always been a fan of stand-up comedy. She loved how comedians used humor to tell stories and connect with their audience. However, when she tried watching English stand-up shows, she struggled to keep up with the fast speech, jokes, and cultural references. She wanted to improve her understanding, but she felt frustrated every time she missed the punchline. Determined to turn this challenge into an opportunity, Sophia decided to start with comedians who spoke more slowly and clearly. She chose a famous stand-up special, turned on the subtitles, and watched it carefully. The first time, she read along to understand the jokes. Then, she watched it again, this time without looking at the subtitles. She paid attention to the comedian's tone, pauses, and expressions. After several sessions, she started recognizing common phrases and slang words. She even found herself predicting punchlines before they were said. To take it a step further, she began repeating short clips aloud, mimicking the comedian's delivery. It was a fun exercise that improved both her pronunciation and confidence in speaking English naturally. One day, Sophia attended an international comedy event in her city. To her surprise, she understood most of the jokes without subtitles. She laughed along with the crowd, feeling a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. Learning English had become an enjoyable journey instead of a frustrating task. In another case, a man named Jake had a different approach to learning. He loved cooking and spent hours watching recipe videos online. However, Most of his favorite chefs were English speakers, and he found it difficult to follow their instructions, without subtitles. He wanted to improve his listening skills while doing something he loved. Instead of watching passively, Jake made a decision. He would cook along with the videos. He listened carefully, pausing when necessary to repeat instructions aloud. He also started writing down new vocabulary words related to cooking, like whisk, sauté, and marinate. Over time, he noticed a huge improvement. Not only could he follow recipes more easily, but he also felt more comfortable with everyday conversations in English. His confidence grew so much that he started sharing his own cooking videos, explaining recipes in English to his followers. Sophia and Jake both found creative ways to practice English without making it feel like studying. They integrated the language into their passions, which kept them motivated and engaged. The key to fluency isn't just memorizing words. It's making English a part of your daily life in a way that excites you. If this resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. It helps us reach more learners like you. Now let's move on to another story of someone who found an unexpected way to improve their English. Liam had always dreamed of traveling the world, but there was one problem. His English skills were not strong enough for confident communication. He had taken English classes before, but when he tried speaking, he would freeze, struggling to find the right words. He knew that if he wanted to explore different countries, he needed to improve his fluency. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment to practice, Liam decided to create his own English immersion experience at home. He changed his phone's language settings to English, started journaling about his day in English, and even talked to himself in the mirror to build confidence. It felt strange at first, but he soon realized that these small changes were making English a natural part of his daily routine. One day, he challenged himself to go a step further. He joined an online community where travelers shared their experiences. He began commenting on posts, asking for travel tips, and even answering questions from other members. At first, he hesitated, afraid of making mistakes. But soon, he realized that people were more focused on the message rather than perfect grammar. After months of practicing, Liam finally booked a solo trip to Canada. When he arrived, he had to ask for directions, order food, and navigate the city, all in English. To his surprise, he managed to hold conversations without feeling overwhelmed. By the end of his trip, he had even made new friends who spoke only English. His confidence skyrocketed, and he realized that fluency was not about being perfect, but about being brave enough to try. In another case, Mia, a university student, struggled with academic English. She needed to understand lectures, write essays, and participate in discussions, but she often found herself overwhelmed by complex vocabulary and fast-speaking professors. She knew she had to improve quickly, or she would fall behind in her studies. Instead of passively listening to lectures, Mia decided to take an active approach. She started summarizing key points in her own words after each class. She also recorded herself reading academic articles aloud to practice pronunciation and get comfortable with formal language. To reinforce what she learned, she explained difficult concepts to her classmates, helping them while strengthening her own understanding. One day, during a group discussion, Mia realized she was no longer afraid to speak up. She expressed her opinions confidently, and her classmates even complimented her on her clarity. It was a turning point. She had gone from struggling to participate to leading conversations. Liam and Mia both proved that fluency isn't about waiting until you feel ready. It's about creating opportunities to use English in real-life situations. Whether it's through travel, social media, or academic discussions, the more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it becomes. If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. It really helps. Support our channel. Now let's dive into another story of someone who transformed their English skills in an unexpected way. Ethan had always been a confident person, but when it came to speaking English, he felt completely out of his comfort zone. He had a strong vocabulary and understood grammar rules, but every time he had to speak, he felt embarrassed about his accent and pronunciation. He feared that people would judge him or struggle to understand what he was saying. Determined to overcome this fear, Ethan started recording himself speaking in English every day. At first, he hated listening to his own voice, but he pushed through the discomfort. He chose different topics to talk about, ranging from his daily routine to his future goals, and analyzed his pronunciation. He even compared his recordings to native speakers and made adjustments accordingly. Over time, Ethan noticed a huge improvement. His words flowed more naturally, and he started recognizing common pronunciation mistakes he had been making. One day, he decided to test his progress by speaking with a native English speaker through a language exchange app. To his surprise, the conversation went smoothly, and the person even complimented him on his pronunciation. Encouraged by this experience, Ethan started joining English-speaking events in his city. At first, he was nervous, but he reminded himself of how much he had improved. The more he spoke, the more his confidence grew. Eventually, he stopped worrying about his accent and focused on expressing his ideas clearly. In another situation, Sophia, a business professional, needed to improve her English fluency for work. She often had to participate in meetings with international clients, but she struggled to keep up with the conversation. She would hesitate, trying to find the right words, and by the time she was ready to speak, the discussion had already moved on. Sophia realized that the best way to improve was to mimic real business conversations. She started watching interviews with business leaders, repeating their sentences to practice intonation and rhythm. She also began writing emails in English and reviewing them carefully to ensure clarity and professionalism. One day, during an important client meeting, Sophia surprised herself. She was able to follow the discussion effortlessly and even contributed valuable insights. Her boss noticed her improvement and trusted her with more international projects. Both Ethan and Sophia learned that fluency is a journey, not a destination. By actively engaging with the language, practicing regularly, and stepping out of their comfort zones, they transformed their English skills. If you're finding these stories helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tips and motivation. Now let's explore another inspiring story of someone who turned their English struggles into success. Lena had always been passionate about storytelling. She loved reading books, watching movies, and even writing short stories in her native language. However, when it came to expressing her ideas in English, she felt frustrated. She could understand English well, but whenever she tried to tell a story, she struggled to find the right words and felt like she was losing her audience's interest. Determined to change this, Lena decided to start thinking in English. She challenged herself to narrate her daily experiences in English, even if it was just in her head. Whether she was walking in the park, cooking dinner, or watching the sunset, she would describe what she was seeing and feeling in English. First, it felt unnatural, but over time, it became a habit. She also started writing her thoughts in a journal, forcing herself to think in English before putting words on paper. This helped her structure her sentences more naturally and improved her storytelling skills. Every evening, she would read aloud what she had written to practice pronunciation and fluency. One day, Lena decided to take it a step further. She joined an online storytelling group where members shared their personal experiences in English. At first, she was nervous, afraid that people would judge her mistakes. But when she told her first story, she realized that others were more focused on the message than on her grammar. Encouraged by the positive feedback, she continued sharing her stories. Week after week, she gained more confidence, and soon she was even adding humor and expressive intonation to make her storytelling more engaging. People started complimenting her ability to captivate an audience, something she never thought she could achieve in English. In another situation, Carlos, a university student, faced a different challenge. He had to give a presentation in English for one of his courses, but public speaking had always been his biggest fear. He was worried that his nervousness would make him forget everything he had prepared. To prepare, Carlos started practicing in front of a mirror. He watched his facial expressions and body language, ensuring that he looked confident even when he didn't feel that way. He also recorded himself and analyzed his performance, making adjustments to improve his tone and pace. To simulate a real audience, he began practicing with his friends. They gave him constructive feedback, pointing out areas where he could improve. He even practiced delivering his presentation in empty classrooms to get used to speaking in a bigger space. When the big day arrived, Carlos took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. His heart was racing, but as he began speaking, he realized something. He had prepared well. The words came naturally, And instead of focusing on his fear, he focused on delivering his message clearly. By the end of the presentation, his professor and classmates applauded his confidence and clarity. Just like Lena and Carlos, many English learners face challenges that seem overwhelming at first. But with the right mindset and consistent practice, they find ways to overcome them. The key is to take small, actionable steps every day and celebrate progress along the way. Have you ever faced a similar situation? If so, leave a comment below and let us know how you worked through it. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's move on to another story about someone who found a unique way to improve their English skills. MMA had always dreamed of traveling the world, but there was one problem. Her English was not good enough to communicate confidently with others. She could read and write fairly well, but when it came to speaking, she would freeze, struggling to find the right words. Determined to change this, she set a goal for herself. She would practice English every single day, no matter what. She started by talking to herself. Every morning while making breakfast, she would describe what she was doing out loud in English. Now I'm making coffee, I'll add some sugar, maybe just a little bit. It felt silly at first, but over time, it became natural. She even started narrating her thoughts when walking down the street, turning everyday moments into English-speaking opportunities. To take it a step further, Emma began using voice-to-text apps. She would speak into her phone and check if the app accurately recognized her words. This helped her identify pronunciation mistakes and correct them immediately. It also gave her confidence, as she started seeing improvements in how clearly she could express herself. Another thing that helped Emma was shadowing native speakers. She found YouTube videos and podcasts featuring native English speakers and repeated what they said, mimicking their pronunciation and rhythm. At first, it was difficult to keep up, but with persistence, she noticed her speech becoming smoother and more natural. One day, Emma decided to challenge herself by ordering food in English at an international restaurant in her city. She walked in, feeling nervous but excited. When the waiter approached, she took a deep breath and confidently placed her order in English. To her surprise, the waiter responded naturally, and the conversation flowed smoothly. It was a small moment, but it gave her a huge boost of confidence. Meanwhile, in another situation, Jake, a software developer, faced a different challenge. He worked for an international company and often had to attend virtual meetings in English. The problem? He was afraid of speaking up. Even when he had great ideas, he hesitated, worried that he would make mistakes or that his colleagues wouldn't understand him. Determined to improve, Jake started preparing for meetings by writing down key phrases he might need. He practiced introducing his points clearly and concisely. Instead of trying to be perfect, he focused on being understood. To get more comfortable, he also practiced with AI language models, simulating conversations he might have at work. This gave him a safe space to experiment with different ways of expressing his thoughts. Over time, he realized that making mistakes wasn't the end of the world. What mattered was that he was communicating effectively. One day during an important meeting, Jake finally spoke up. He shared an idea about improving a project, and to his surprise, his colleagues responded positively. His manager even praised his contribution. That moment changed everything. From then on, he became more active in discussions, proving to himself that he was capable of expressing his ideas in English. Like Emma and Jake, many learners face situations that make them nervous about speaking English. But the secret is simple. The more you practice, the more confident you become. It's all about taking small steps, making mistakes, and learning from them. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? If so, how did you overcome it? Share your experiences in the comments. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories and English learning tips. Now let's continue with another story about someone who took an unconventional approach to mastering English. Sophie had always admired people who spoke English fluently. She worked in a travel agency and often had to assist international clients. While she could understand them fairly well, responding confidently was another challenge. She would second-guess her grammar, pause too often, and sometimes completely freeze in the middle of a sentence. She knew she had to improve, but traditional language learning methods didn't seem to work for her. One day she stumbled upon an unusual method: acting. A friend who was a theater enthusiast suggested she practice English by memorizing and performing scenes from movies. At first, Sophie laughed at the idea, but she decided to give it a try. She picked one of her favorite films, a romantic comedy, and memorized a short dialogue between two characters. Standing in front of a mirror, she practiced each line with different emotions, paying attention to pronunciation, tone, and body language. She even recorded herself to track her progress. At first, she felt awkward, but soon she realized that acting helped her feel more confident expressing herself in English. The exaggerated emotions and varied intonations made the language feel more natural to her. As she got more comfortable, Sophie expanded her practice to include business-related phrases she often used at work. She found scenes from TV shows where characters negotiated deals, handled complaints, or made polite small talk. By mimicking the dialogues, she learned how to sound more professional and persuasive in English. One day, a foreign couple walked into her travel agency, looking for recommendations. Sophie took a deep breath and engaged them in conversation. To her surprise, the words flowed effortlessly. She answered their questions, described destinations vividly, and even made a few jokes. The couple was impressed, and Sophie felt a rush of confidence. She realized that practicing English through acting had helped her develop a more natural and expressive way of speaking. In another situation, Carlos, a university student, had a completely different approach to improving his English. He was passionate about gaming and spent hours playing online multiplayer games. However, he noticed that the best players communicated in English, strategizing and coordinating their moves in real time. If he wanted to be part of the top-tier teams, he needed to improve his speaking skills. At first, Carlos was hesitant to use voice chat. He worried about making mistakes and being judged. But one day, during an intense match, his team needed quick decisions, and typing in the chat box wasn't fast enough. He finally turned on his microphone and started giving instructions in English. It wasn't perfect, but his teammates understood him, and they won the match. Encouraged by this small victory, Carlos started speaking more during games. He listened to how native speakers communicated and mimicked their phrases. Over time, he picked up slang, expressions, and a more natural flow of speech. His confidence grew, and he even made friends from different countries. They started talking outside of the game, discussing life, culture, and personal interests, all in English. What started as a way to improve his gaming skills turned into an immersive language learning experience. One day, Carlos had to present a project in his university's English class. Normally, he would have been nervous, but he realized that speaking in front of his classmates wasn't that different from talking to his gaming friends. Using the confidence he had built in voice chats, he delivered his presentation smoothly, surprising even himself. Sophie and Carlos both found unique ways to practice English in real-life situations. Whether through acting or gaming, they proved that learning doesn't have to be boring. The key is to find an activity that excites you and use it as an opportunity to practice speaking. What about you? Have you ever used an unconventional method to improve your English? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and language tips. Now, let's explore another story about someone who faced an unexpected language barrier and found a creative way to overcome it. Elena had always been passionate about photography. She loved traveling to different countries, capturing beautiful landscapes, and sharing her work on social media. However, she faced a big challenge. Most of her followers were English speakers, and she struggled to write engaging captions and interact with them confidently. She knew that improving her English would not only help her connect with a global audience, but also open doors to international photography collaborations. Determined to overcome this barrier, Elena started by translating her photo captions from her native language into English using online tools. However, she quickly realized that direct translations often sounded unnatural. Some expressions didn't make sense, and the emotional depth of her words was lost. Frustrated but not discouraged, she decided to analyze how native speakers wrote about their experiences. She followed professional photographers on Instagram, read their captions carefully, and took notes on common phrases and sentence structures. She also watched travel vlogs and paid attention to how people described places and emotions. Inspired by what she learned, she began rewriting her captions in her own words, trying to make them sound more authentic. At first, it was a slow process, but as she practiced daily, she started noticing patterns in the language. She also engaged more with her audience, responding to comments in English instead of just liking them. Sometimes she made mistakes, but her followers appreciated her efforts and even helped her correct small errors. This interaction made her feel more comfortable and encouraged her to keep improving. One day, an international travel magazine noticed her work and reached out to her. They wanted to feature one of her photos and asked her to write a short description of the experience behind the shot. This was her biggest challenge yet. She had to express her emotions and storytelling skills in English for a professional audience. Elena spent hours crafting the perfect description. She carefully chose her words, revised multiple times, and even asked an online language exchange partner to review it. When the magazine finally published her photo with her English caption, she felt an incredible sense of achievement. Not only had she improved her writing skills, but she had also reached a wider audience with her passion for photography. In another situation, Daniel, a coffee shop owner, had a completely different reason for improving his English. His cafe was located in a popular tourist area, and he often had to serve international customers. While he could take basic orders, he struggled with casual conversations. He wanted to create a welcoming atmosphere, but his limited vocabulary made interactions feel awkward. Instead of taking traditional English classes, Daniel decided to turn his coffee shop into a language learning environment. He labeled all the items in his cafe with English words, menu items, ingredients, and even common phrases like, "Enjoy your coffee," and "Have a great day." This not only helped him, but also encouraged his staff to practice English. Additionally, he started a language corner in his cafe. Every Sunday morning, he reserved a few tables for customers who wanted to practice English. Tourists, locals, and expats would gather, order their coffee, and engage in casual conversations. At first, Daniel just listened, but over time he became more confident and started participating in discussions. One day, a travel blogger visited his cafe and was impressed by the unique language learning environment. She wrote about it in an article, and soon Daniel's coffee shop became famous for its friendly, multilingual atmosphere. More and more international visitors came not just for the coffee, but for the experience of connecting with people through language. Through small daily interactions, Daniel gradually improved his fluency. He no longer felt nervous when speaking to customers, and his cafe became a popular spot for cultural exchange. His experience showed that language learning doesn't always have to come from textbooks. Sometimes the best way to learn is by immersing yourself in real-life situations. Elena and Daniel both discovered that practicing English in creative and meaningful ways made a huge difference in their confidence and communication skills. Whether through social media or daily conversations, they turned their challenges into opportunities for growth. Have you ever learned English through an unexpected experience? Share your story in the comments. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Now let's hear about another inspiring journey. This time, about someone who overcame their fear of speaking English in front of a large audience. Mia had always been an excellent writer in English, but when it came to speaking, she froze. She worked as a marketing specialist for a global company, and while she could easily communicate through emails and reports, participating in meetings was a nightmare. Every time she had to speak in front of her colleagues, her mind went blank, and her hands would start shaking. She knew that if she wanted to advance in her career, she had to overcome her fear of speaking English. Determined to find a solution, Mia started practicing alone in front of a mirror. She read her emails out loud and recorded herself speaking to analyze her pronunciation and fluency. However, she quickly realized that practicing alone was not enough. She needed real conversations with people. That's when she discovered online language exchange platforms. She started having short, informal conversations with native speakers. At first, it was terrifying, but she found patient and supportive language partners who encouraged her to keep going. They reassured her that making mistakes was a natural part of learning. Over time, she became more comfortable with spontaneous conversations, but the fear of speaking in meetings still lingered. One day, her manager asked her to present a marketing report to an international team. She panicked at first, but instead of declining, she decided to prepare thoroughly. She wrote down key points, practiced multiple times, and even rehearsed in front of her language partners. She reminded herself that she didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to communicate her ideas clearly. When the day of the presentation arrived, Mia was still nervous, but something was different. She took a deep breath and focused on delivering her message rather than worrying about making mistakes. As she spoke, she realized that people were listening to her, not judging her. She finished her presentation successfully, and to her surprise, her colleagues complimented her clarity and confidence. That moment changed everything for Mia. She no longer avoided speaking in meetings, and with each presentation, her confidence grew. Eventually, she was promoted to a leadership position where she had to communicate in English daily. By facing her fears and practicing consistently, she transformed her weakness into one of her biggest strengths. In another situation, Leo, a personal trainer, had a different challenge. He had recently moved to an English-speaking country and struggled to communicate with his clients. He knew all the technical terms related to fitness, but casual conversations and small talk were difficult for him. He wanted to connect better with his clients, so he came up with a unique way to practice English. Instead of taking traditional lessons, Leo used his gym sessions as a learning experience. He asked his clients to correct him whenever he made a mistake, and he paid close attention to the way they spoke. He also started watching fitness-related YouTube videos in English and imitated how trainers explained exercises and motivated their students. Over time, Leo developed his own style of speaking in English. He learned to give clear instructions, use motivational phrases, and even joke with his clients. One day, a famous fitness influencer visited his gym and was impressed by his energy and coaching style. She featured him in one of her videos, which led to a huge increase in his clientele. Leo's story proves that language learning doesn't always have to be separate from daily life. By integrating English into his work and making it part of his routine, he improved his fluency naturally and effectively. Have you ever learned English in a way that was completely different from traditional methods? Let us know in the comments. And if you're finding these stories helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring content. Now let's hear about another unique journey. This time, about someone who mastered English through writing before ever. Speaking a word, Alex had always been passionate about writing. He loved to read books, and writing was a way for him to express his thoughts and ideas. However, Alex had always struggled with speaking English. Despite knowing how to write grammatically correct sentences, he found it difficult to communicate orally. He was intimidated by the speed of native speakers and the fact that he couldn't keep up in conversations. To tackle this, Alex decided to focus on his writing first. He began by keeping a daily journal in English. Every morning, he would write about his thoughts, the things he did the day before, or any ideas that came to mind. This allowed him to work on his vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structure without the pressure of speaking. After a few months, Alex felt more comfortable with his written English, but speaking still felt daunting. He realized that while writing improved his understanding of the language, he needed to speak it as well. So he turned his focus to podcasts. He started listening to podcasts in English on various topics and transcribing them. This not only improved his listening skills, but also gave him a model for natural conversational English. In parallel, Alex also began mimicking the podcasts he listened to. He would pause the audio, repeat the sentences he heard, and try to imitate the intonation, rhythm, and accent. Slowly but surely, his speaking started to improve. The more he practiced speaking aloud, the more confident he became in his ability to hold a conversation. One day, Alex attended a conference for writers. When he spoke to a group of fellow writers in English, he was pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to communicate. He had come a long way from his initial fear of speaking. His writing skills had laid the foundation for his speaking, and by practicing speaking in small steps, he had finally reached a level where he could engage confidently with others. Alex's story demonstrates how starting with one skill, like writing, can be a solid foundation for mastering others, like speaking. He built his confidence step by step, and eventually, speaking became just as natural as writing. If you're struggling with speaking, maybe focusing on writing first could be a great way to begin. In another story, we have Sarah, who used her love for reading to tackle her pronunciation challenges. Sarah was an avid reader, and she loved diving into novels, especially mystery books in English. But she often felt frustrated because she could understand everything while reading. But when it came to speaking, her pronunciation was far from perfect. She felt that her accent was a barrier to being understood. One day, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. Instead of feeling discouraged, she used her love for reading as a tool to improve her pronunciation. She chose a few of her favorite mystery books and began reading them aloud. At first, it was difficult. She stumbled over words and couldn't get the right rhythm, but she was determined to keep going. To improve her pronunciation, Sarah listened to audiobooks of the same novels while following along with the text. She paid close attention to the way the narrator emphasized certain words and phrases. Whenever she encountered a word she struggled with, she would look up its correct pronunciation and repeat it several times. Soon, Sarah noticed a change. Her pronunciation was becoming clearer, and her confidence in speaking was growing. She started recording herself reading passages from the books and listening to the recordings. This helped her identify areas where she could improve and make adjustments. One evening, Sarah decided to join an online book club where participants discussed books in English. She was nervous, but she pushed herself to participate in the discussion. To her surprise, people understood her perfectly, and the feedback she received was overwhelmingly positive. She had done it. Her pronunciation had improved significantly, and she could speak with more confidence than ever before. Sarah's story shows that if you're struggling with pronunciation, using something you already enjoy, like reading, can be a powerful tool. By practicing aloud and paying attention to pronunciation models, you can make significant strides in improving your spoken English. Do you enjoy reading books in English? How have you used your reading skills to improve your speaking? Let us know in the comments. If these stories are helping you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more tips and inspiration. Now, let's dive into another story about someone who used storytelling to overcome their fear of speaking English. Stay tuned. Let's talk about Michael. Michael was a quiet person, and he preferred to stay behind the scenes. He had always been interested in storytelling, but speaking in English had always made him nervous. He had a rich imagination and could easily tell stories in his head, but when it came to expressing them aloud, he would freeze. He feared making mistakes and being judged by others, so he avoided speaking as much as possible. But Michael had an epiphany one day. He realized that he could use his love for storytelling as a way to overcome his fear of speaking. Instead of focusing on speaking perfectly, he decided to focus on telling a story from start to finish, no matter how many mistakes he made along the way. He began by recording himself telling short stories in English. At first, his recordings were filled with pauses, mispronunciations, and awkward phrasing, but Michael didn't give up. He kept practicing, each time feeling a little more comfortable. He even started to listen to his recordings, identifying the areas where he needed to improve. Slowly, he noticed progress. One of Michael's favorite techniques was to visualize the story in his mind before speaking it out loud. This helped him relax and focus on the flow of the story, rather than worrying about grammar or vocabulary. With time, he grew more confident in his ability to express his thoughts in English. His stories became more fluent, and his pronunciation improved as well. Michael didn't stop there. He started sharing his stories with a small group of friends who were also learning English. They would listen to his stories and provide constructive feedback, helping him improve even more. The positive reinforcement boosted his confidence and motivated him to keep going. A few months later, Michael participated in a storytelling event for non-native English speakers. He was nervous, but when it was his turn to speak, he stood up and shared one of his favorite stories. To his surprise, the audience was captivated, and his story was well received. The feedback was incredibly positive, and Michael couldn't believe how far he had come. Michael's story is a great example of how using something you enjoy, like storytelling, can help you overcome the fear of speaking. By focusing on the message rather than perfection, and practicing consistently, you can improve both your fluency and confidence in English. In another situation, we have Jenny, who tackled her speaking anxiety by embracing everyday conversations. Jenny had always been hesitant to speak in English, especially in social settings. She was afraid of making mistakes and being misunderstood. However, she realized that one of the best ways to improve her speaking was to simply start talking, no matter how small the conversation was. Jenny made it a point to engage in casual conversations in English every day. She started with her colleagues at work, asking simple questions like, "How's your day going?" or "What did you do this weekend?" At first, these conversations were brief, and Jenny's nerves were high, but over time, she grew more comfortable with the flow of conversation. She also began chatting with friends who were learning English as well. They would meet up for coffee and practice speaking in a relaxed environment. The more Jenny practiced, the more natural it felt to speak in English. She learned to focus less on perfect grammar and more on expressing herself clearly. As Jenny gained confidence, she started participating in group discussions where everyone spoke in English. At first, it felt challenging, but the more she practiced, the more comfortable she became with spontaneous conversations. She was no longer afraid of making mistakes because she understood that mistakes were part of the learning process. Jenny's story demonstrates that you don't have to wait for the perfect moment to start speaking. Sometimes all it takes is taking small steps, like starting with brief conversations or engaging in casual chats with friends. By practicing consistently, you can overcome your fear of speaking and improve your fluency in a natural way. Now, let's take a quick break and reflect on some of the key takeaways from these stories. Remember, whether it's through storytelling, casual conversations, or finding methods that work for you, improving your fluency and pronunciation in English is a gradual process. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become. If you found these stories helpful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might benefit from it. We're here to help you every step of the way on your language learning journey, and now we'll continue with another story about someone who used visualization techniques to master their pronunciation. Stay with us. In our next story, let's talk about Robert, who found a unique way to improve his pronunciation. Robert had always struggled with certain sounds in English. The th sound, for example, was a real challenge for him. He often found himself either replacing it with a D or F sound, which made his speech hard to understand at times. He was frustrated because he knew that pronunciation was key to sounding fluent, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to get it right. One day, while watching an English movie, Robert noticed something interesting. The actors would often over-exaggerate certain sounds, making their pronunciation more clear and easy to understand. This gave him an idea: what if he practiced the th sound by exaggerating it, just like the actors? He thought that by emphasizing the sound, he could train his mouth and tongue to form it correctly. Robert started practicing in front of a mirror, exaggerating the "the" sound as he spoke words like thanks, this, and that. At first, it felt odd, and he looked a bit silly doing it. But soon, he noticed something incredible. By exaggerating the sound, he was training his mouth to make the motion correctly. Gradually, he was able to say the words more naturally without over-exaggerating. What's even more interesting is that Robert didn't stop with the t sound. He started applying this method to other sounds that gave him trouble. The R sound, for example, was another tricky one for him. By emphasizing it in a controlled way, he was able to improve his pronunciation significantly. Over time, Robert found that this technique was not only fun, but also very effective in boosting his confidence. By focusing on pronunciation in a playful and exaggerated way, Robert was able to master sounds he once struggled with. It was no longer a frustrating task. It became a challenge he enjoyed. As a result, his pronunciation improved, and so did his overall fluency. This story shows that sometimes a little creativity can go a long way. By experimenting with new ways to practice, like exaggerating certain sounds, you can make the learning process more enjoyable and effective. In another example, we have Sarah, who used her love for music to improve her pronunciation. Sarah had always been passionate about singing, and she loved listening to English songs. But like many learners, she found it difficult to pronounce certain words when singing in English. The words would sometimes come out jumbled or unclear, which made her self-conscious. One day, Sarah decided to combine her two passions, singing and learning English. She started singing along to her favorite songs, paying close attention to how the singers enunciated the lyrics. As she sang, she tried to match their pronunciation and rhythm as closely as possible. This helped her get a better feel for the flow of the language and its intonation patterns. Sarah also began recording herself singing in English and then comparing her recordings to the original tracks. She noticed that she could pick up on subtle differences in her pronunciation that she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't recorded herself. By doing this, she was able to identify areas where she needed improvement, such as the articulation of certain vowel sounds. Singing along to English songs became a fun and engaging way for Sarah to practice her pronunciation. It also helped her improve her listening skills as she became more attuned to the nuances of spoken English. Over time, she found that not only was she singing more clearly, but her everyday speech also became more fluent. This story highlights how finding something you enjoy can make the process of improving your pronunciation more enjoyable. By combining a hobby like singing with language practice, Sarah was able to make significant progress in a fun and engaging way. In yet another situation, we have David, who struggled with his pronunciation because he felt nervous speaking in front of others. David had always been a bit shy, and the idea of speaking in English with people made him anxious. He knew that speaking was essential for fluency, but he just couldn't get over his nerves. The fear of being judged made it difficult for him to speak confidently. One day, David realized that he could practice speaking without the pressure of others around him. He started speaking to himself in English when he was alone at home. At first, it felt awkward and unnatural, but David kept at it. He began narrating his thoughts, describing what he was doing, or even talking about his day to himself in English. David found that speaking aloud, even if no one was listening, helped him practice the sounds and rhythms of English in a relaxed environment. He didn't feel the pressure to be perfect, and as a result, he became more comfortable with speaking in English. Over time, his confidence grew, and he started speaking more fluidly, even when others were present. What David learned is that practicing speaking doesn't always have to involve an audience. By starting in a low-pressure environment, like speaking to yourself, you can build up your confidence and pronunciation over time. Eventually, speaking to others will feel much easier. This approach is particularly helpful for those who may feel anxious or self-conscious about speaking in English. It's a great way to ease into conversation without the fear of making mistakes or being judged. Another strategy that proved successful for Emma was using visual aids to improve her pronunciation. Emma had always been a visual learner, and she noticed that when she could see the word written out, she had an easier time pronouncing it correctly. So, she decided to use this strength to her advantage. Emma began writing down words that she found difficult to pronounce and studying their phonetic symbols. She also watched videos of native speakers pronouncing these words, paying close attention to the way their mouths moved as they spoke. By associating the written word with the correct pronunciation, Emma found that she was able to reproduce the sounds more accurately. She also used flashcards with pictures and phonetic transcriptions to reinforce her learning. Each time she looked at the flashcards, she would say the word aloud and try to match the correct pronunciation. This visual approach helped her internalize the sounds and improved her overall pronunciation. Emma's story demonstrates how combining visual learning with pronunciation practice can help reinforce what you're learning. By associating words with images and phonetic symbols, you can make pronunciation practice more effective. Now let's pause for a moment and reflect on the techniques we've discussed. Whether it's through exaggeration, singing, talking to yourself, or using visual aids, there are many creative ways to improve your pronunciation. The key is to find what works best for you and stick with it. As we reach the end of today's session, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed. We've explored various creative ways to improve your pronunciation, from exaggerating sounds, singing along to English songs, to practicing speaking in a low-pressure environment. Each of these methods offers a unique approach, and the most important thing is to find what works best for you. Remember, learning a new language, especially one as complex as English, takes time and patience. It's perfectly normal to encounter challenges along the way, but by staying consistent and trying different strategies, you'll continue to improve. Whether you choose to practice alone, use visual aids, or sing to your heart's content, the key is to keep practicing and stay motivated. We'd love to hear about your own experiences and any techniques you found helpful in improving your pronunciation. Have you tried any of the methods we discussed today? Or perhaps you have your own tips and strategies to share with others? Please feel free to leave a comment below and let us know about the challenges you've faced and how you've overcome them. Your story might inspire others to keep going on their language learning journey. Also, if you found today's video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. This helps us reach more people who might benefit from these tips, and also allows us to keep creating content that helps you improve your English skills. By subscribing, you'll stay updated with our latest videos so you won't miss out on more useful tips and techniques. Remember, the road to mastering English is a journey, and we're here to help you along the way. Thanks for being part of our community, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.